I'll tell you honestly, if the kid turned out to have 3 eyeballs and 4 ears and looked like the milkman, we would have been fine.
Yeah.
What I love about your eggs is that we find solutions.
Oh my God, I totally get what you're saying. Hey, and thank you for joining me. This is Don Lewis, and I am here doing an episode of Egg-Sided. This is a sponsored podcast that talks about things in fertility, especially dealing with egg donation, adoption, surrogacy, and fertility treatments. Today is really an interesting podcast because I brought someone in who took the journey and actually looked at started out looking at doing an adoption. And after they got down that path, they changed directions and went with donation for a bunch of different reasons, but some really good and solid ones. But, it's a personal choice. There are benefits on both sides doing it either way. Adoption offers homes to children that would have maybe an unstable life, and it's absolutely amazing the people that do that. So my guest is Jay, and I appreciate him taking the time out of his schedule to come in and talk about what he went through, because when we were talking about it earlier, I said, hey, this is really a good option to put out there for people to hear and that are going through this, that want to increase the family and are not sure which direction to go.
Well, thanks for letting me come and tell my story. I really appreciate it. Now that we're on the other side of it, there are definitely some lessons learned that I think are good to share with folks. About me, I'm a 50-year-old gay man, live with my husband of 12 years, and we have a beautiful baby boy who's just about 7.5 months old. And there's some week number count that I'm supposed to know, but I just 7.5 months. And I work in the finance industry. My husband works for a nonprofit organization, and we are what you would consider, middle class income kind of family.
Right. I like that. How he wants you to keep it down to the weeks. That's pretty good.
I think it's like 30, something like that. I'm not entirely sure. 32.
Hopefully he doesn't hear this and get you in trouble.
I'm sure there will be words exchanged.
So what I found out really that I thought was so interesting about your journey was when we were talking about this, you were talking about how you wanted to go into adopt, and it was because of all the right reasons. You felt like it was going to give a child a home that didn't have one, a real home.
Well, initially, we looked at foster care. We looked at trying to adopt through the foster care system, and that was our initial sort of start.
Uh-huh.
We're white liberals, and so of course you would adopt through foster care. That's what you do.
Right.
But as we looked at it, the fear that we had was that while we would love to give a child who may not be in a stable situation a stable and loving situation, there's always that risk in the back of your mind that child's going to go away. And that was our biggest fears, that we'd get attached to this wonderful soul. Right. And we've had some friends and they tell you that up front. Yeah. They say, this is a temp job. And there is the possibility down the road that this might be a permanent solution, but this is a temp job because this is a community help. And that didn't fit the goal that we had.
No,
and
I can't imagine, because to think about that and have this relationship with this child, and the state just goes, no, we're going to take that away. Imagine anybody listening to this. Imagine if you have a child that you've bonded with, it's just your waking world, and then all of a sudden someone walks in and says, sorry, we're going to have to take that back. I get that.
And in one hand, it's a wonderful thing, because now the unstable situation that this child came from is now stable and good, and you have the opportunity to reunite this family that desperately needs to be reunited. But on the other hand, there's us on the back end, kind of like, and okay, how do you process that emotionally? And so my husband and I, we the more we got to talk about that, we did a couple of sort of introductory sort of onboarding meetings and sessions, and ultimately we decided that this process can be painful and confusing enough, and that we probably wanted to limit our exposure to emotional damage.
No, like you said, I don't know how how you go through something like that and not become scarred from it. And then that kind of led you into the path of, hey, why don't we just look at going into adoption? That was the next launch.
That was the next, yeah. And I have to pause and say that those folks who do provide foster care for kids are amazing, wonderful souls, and they understand that it's a temp gig, and hats off to them. They are better people than I.
Absolute angels.
But on earth.
Yeah.
But that said, yeah. So ultimately, we decided to look at adoption. And I got to tell you, there was some sticker shock there. There's a couple of different ways you can go through an agency, or you can go through a lawyer. We're in California, so it's really more the agency option. And it was not as affordable or as low priced as we had anticipated. We were looking at, I think, all in right around $65,000, $70,000. And for that kind of money, there are other options that might be a little more toward our liking. And then again, with the adoption thing, there's no guarantees there until that baby comes out and it's placed in your care, because kind of up until then, there's always the option for the person to change their mind, and there's no guarantees with that either. And so the more we looked at some of those options, the more we thought, how much is our peace of mind worth?
Right. How
much is it worth to make a plan that we know is still not 100% guaranteed, but has a higher likelihood of ending in a way that's going to make us happy?
Well, you were telling me also, which just I couldn't, and I don't think this way. And so when you started talking about running into like faith-based ones.
Yes. Yeah. So not every adoption agency has to work with families who are queer.
Right.
They just don't have to. And there are some organizations that get around that because they are based in other states. Even though they do business in California, they're based in other states. And we were kind of looking at maybe doing some out-of-state adoptions. And that was one of the biases that we ran up against. And it was sort of jarring. And, we live here where, you can, I've got a bumper sticker on my car and nobody seems to mind. And, I don't get any dirty looks or dirty, and that just isn't anything that we had anticipated running up against. But
and they could throw a wrench in it anyway.
At any time.
Yeah. And you wouldn't even know.
Right.
So you had to deal with it being way more expensive, a very uncertain outcome. And then on top of that, you had to deal with trying to navigate through prejudice, basically.
Yeah. And so that was why it was important for us, once we kind of decided to explore other options, that we found clinicians and we found agencies that were not just tolerant but celebratory, that were welcoming, and that was something that we started looking at quite closely.
Well, and for me, because I've been, I do a kind of a deep dive before I do this, I'm looking at the pros and cons. You're two gay men, and you get to at least put one of your DNAs into the potential egg and then have it grown. So you have a biological, and you can go through and pick the characteristics, and these eggs are checked. So you have a genetic readout knowing that you're getting a healthy embryo, blastocyst, or a baby, eventual baby, if everything goes well. Obviously, no guarantees.
Right. And that was a good benefit to have. I'll tell you honestly, if the kid turned out to have 3 eyeballs and 4 ears and looked like the milkman, we would have been fine.
Yeah.
But ultimately, those are decisions that you make during the process, not because you're wanting to have the blonde, blue-eyed baby, but because you want to make sure that you're putting, and this is how it was explained to us, that you're putting in the healthiest embryo that has the best chance of viability. And that's why they do those genetic tests, to make sure that if we have a disease that is handed from father to son, then we're going to pick a female embryo. So those are some of the stuff that factor into those decisions, that through this high tech, Star Trek-y process, they can really kind of whittle down into that degree of certainty of viability. And that was really what we cared about, because again, we started this journey wanting no uncertainty. And,
Right.
and so if the kid came out with a tail and barked like a dog, that would have been fine, as long as it was healthy.
Right.
And that was really what mattered to us. And so being able to work with an agency that had the relationships with the clinics, where it was all sort of one-stop shop, where you didn't have to ship the embryos from San Francisco down to San Diego, or from LA down to San Diego, where you didn't have to do any of that, where you didn't have to ship the sperm, where my truck was the sperm shipper. I drove to the clinic and I did my thing. That was the sperm shipper.
You were the walking pride.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was sort of how that was. It makes it a lot easier to process, to wrap your head around, and then you look for a staff. We were blessed in that we had a really caring doctor who was more than happy to help us have a family and was excited about it, and who had worked with people before. We got him by a referral.
Well, let's give him a little bit of a plug.
Yeah, sure.
Who was this doctor?
So it was Dr. Sam Wood. You can make the joke about the name because we all do. And he's out of Gen 5 Fertility in San Diego in Sereno Valley. And he had worked to help some friends of ours have kids. We didn't even know that. And so when we were having dinner with them, and they were asking, so how's it going? How's the process? And Eric is his name, and he said, well, if that's something you're thinking about, this is who we went through. And I'm like, you're kidding. I had no idea. I had no idea where those kids came from. I just assumed they were Bob's from a previous marriage.
Right.
And it turns out they were that's how they got them. And so that was 20 years ago, or more, because those kids are in college now. And so that was how we got in. And fortunately, Dr. Wood's still in business. He's still doing great, and the clinic is beautiful. And and they had access to the eggs too, which was something that we didn't know how to do. Like, how do you go and get a woman to give you your eggs or their eggs, and how do you go and get a woman to carry your baby? I mean, we see those Lifetime TV shows, and that was not the experience we wanted.
Right. I know you worked with Your Eggs to get to get that as the agency, and I know that they have relationships with a lot of different clinics, but they work I know that they work really well with Dr. Wood, and so that was like kind of the best. Everything just kind of came together.
Yeah. They actually Dr. Wood actually recommended Your Eggs to us as an option to get an egg donor, and so that worked out really well for us. And again, you have the ability to kind of match some characteristics, and so we thought, well, it doesn't cost any more money. It's all the same process. Why don't we get a kid that looks like they could have been our kid?
Right.
And so we kind of looked for things like that. Unfortunately, we didn't find any that hated the Chargers and loved the Padres, so we just kind of had to settle with what we had.
You had to just kind of
go. We just had to settle, man.
That's awesome.
We needed somebody who hated the Dodgers, and those just aren't conversations that you can have.
You can't, unfortunately, but you know what? Hopefully, there's guidance.
Right. We really will learn the true answer between, is it nature or nurture?
Yeah. Because we'll find out.
We're going to provide the nurture part of that argument.
That's fantastic. Now, I also know that you're involved with thinking about having number 2. Now,
yes.
Now you have a boy. Is the option to have another boy, or are you thinking about having a girl this time?
That depends on which one of us you ask. If you ask me, I would love to have a baby girl. If you ask my husband, he was raised with all sisters, and he says they're the meanest things in the world. Little girls are the meanest things in the world. So it's really, we're still having that discussion, but we are pretty set on, because this process went so smoothly. We are and was affordable for us, and so we're in those discussions now. I would call them negotiations.
Right. Well, that's one of the things you have to key on. I mean, that's one of the most important things when you're into an agency, right? You actually have to communicate really well with your partner, because everybody's got their own expectations, and you need to kind of figure that out before you start really moving into that path. Is that
Yeah,
right?
and one of the concerns for us was cost, because we do want to make sure that we're not spending money that could be better served, setting up a college fund or buying gas. We're just trying to figure that stuff out. But one of the benefits for us, and it's my understanding that this is not everybody's experience, but one of the benefits for us was that our egg donor that we used had some extra eggs. And so they were kind of banked.
Yes.
And so we have access to those, which makes this a little more affordable for us. And the expectation is that they'll just be as viable as the other ones. So that's sort of where we're at in the process.
And that's perfect. I mean, that's the best case scenario, especially if you get extra eggs, you can bank those eggs, and at a future date, so you have genetic to relate to each other. So
Right.
they literally are going to be siblings.
Yeah, in case that egg donor isn't donating eggs anymore, if this was something that they wanted to do and then did it and then moved on with their life to go pursue other things, which we understand happens, then you're going to have even more of there are more variables to factor into that. But in this case, we got really lucky. Our egg donor was like a machine, and so there's enough eggs there that the folks at Gen 5 and Dr. Wood think that we have a good shot.
That's perfect. Now, you're two gay men, so did you go? You obviously went surrogate.
Yeah.
Was that a friend, or did you go through
No.
an agency for that too?
No, we understand that there are some folks who will use a friend. We don't. We certainly have some folks who we probably could have asked. Like, he has a sister. He's got a lot of sisters. But what we wanted to do was have someone where the relationship was clearly understood from the beginning. There were clear deliverables along the way, and that at the end of the process, that relationship was concluded. Everybody walked away happy, having all the expectations met. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Make sure the lawyer who writes up the contract with the surrogate knows what they're doing. And we got really lucky because Dr. Wood had all kinds of recommendations for it, and so did the surrogacy agency. And oddly, they were all the same people, so that kind of worked out really nicely.
So you used which surrogate agency did you use? Did you use Great Beginnings?
We did.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's one that Dr. Wood works closely with.
Yeah. So that makes sense. That's probably why the lawyers were all the same people.
Yeah. So it was really nice that you have this kind of nice, like you said when you started out, that everything was just kind of like fit together. So,
Yeah, and I mean, you pay for it, but it's what you're paying for is peace of mind and certainty and an elimination of variables. And I will say that if you are someone who is out there and you're listening to this and you think, well, I've had this conversation with my friend and she is willing to do this, great, awesome. Still make sure you have a lawyer draw up a contract.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want is for that friendship that you're counting on to be important to your child's life and your life to be damaged because the expectations weren't clear and you didn't know what you were supposed to do and they didn't know what they were supposed to get and all of that stuff. So make sure that that's still all written up, even if it is a friend.
Yeah, it's funny. They also do they do a podcast at Your Eggs, and they had two lawyers. They did two sessions with lawyers.
Oh, really?
And so I listened to those, and it's so right. I mean, you have to establish who the parent is.
Mm-hmm.
They were telling horror stories where they didn't have good lawyers, and the child was being birthed, and there was no family. There was no parent. There was no
Right.
parent. So,
And in those situations, there's no guarantee that surrogate isn't going to change their mind, and you don't have a legal contract that prevents that from happening.
right.
But here in California, all of that's understood. That's settled case law. There's, you have a contract. This is the deal. That's what the surrogate is. And all the surrogates that we were having, we had to choose from, were experienced surrogates, meaning they had done this before, so they kind of knew what to do, how to do it, and kind of how the relationship was going to end at the end, and so that's great. So and one of the benefits, not to sell California, but here both of our names are on the birth certificate.
Wow.
It's my name and it's my husband's name, and we're the parents. We're not mother or father or
Right.
parent one, parent two.
That makes sense. And people don't know that. I mean, most people don't get that.
Yeah, and that's something that you can negotiate through that's part of what the lawyer does for you, and that's part of what the agency kind of takes care of for you. But when you're enrolling your kid in, we are already enrolled in childcare because there's like a 2-year wait period.
Yeah.
So we are already enrolled, and when you have the birth certificate and both your names are on it, it just makes your life a whole lot easier. When you're doing medical care and both your names are on the birth certificate, and you're taking that to the doctor's office, because the doctor isn't going to see an adult who isn't related to the kid, and
Right. No, that makes sense.
It's so much easier.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, these are the details that actually your journey gave you insight.
Oh yeah.
To. And so, excuse me. So, I mean, okay. So I know you're busy, and I don't want to take away anything, but if you were just to kind of nutshell people going through this, they're at that start, they're thinking about having a family. If they listen to any of this and want a good takeaway from this, what would you go with?
Know what's best for you. Know what your goal is at the end, and choose the path that's going to get you there using resources you can afford to exhaust. That's the kind of know what you want, have patience, find someone to work with that you believe in, that makes you feel good, that has good customer service, because all of those little things are going to wind up mattering at the end. And then just have patience.
Wow, that is so cool. I really do appreciate you taking time. I know, and talking about this, it's so fun to talk to you about this, because I know how hard it is for a lot of intended parents. I've talked to them, and it's just crushing at some of these stories. And to sit across the table from you and have you laughing and happy and know you have this, thinking about having your second child this way, it just makes me so happy that is a success story I can share with people.
It's my pleasure to share it, and thanks. And I chuckled a little bit when you said that phrase, intended parents.
Yeah.
It's one of those weird things that you think about. I know that's an industry that's what people refer to us as, but it is kind of funny, intended parents. Well, we can drop the intended now. We're parents.
You're parents.
We're just parents.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you again, Jay. That was a great thing, and I hope people that had the time to listen to this got some good information, because that's why I do these. So appreciate you again, and until next time, I'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you liked that podcast. It was actually really fun to do. And that's the thing about this podcast here, is I bring real people who've had real experiences at what people are going through. And you get some insight on probably questions that you have that you wouldn't be able to ask, just walk up to people and find out. So this podcast is actually dedicated to finding the people that are going through life's experience down this line, and have open and honest conversations with them, so that you could kind of get a glimpse of what's going on and hopefully help you make decisions in the future. If you like it, subscribe. That's the best way to keep us doing it. And look for a new one every 2 weeks. Thank you again for listening. Take care.